Welcome to Walking with Jesus Bible Study. We're going to be in the book of John, chapter 17, verse 26. And I have declared unto them thy name, and will declare it, that the love wherewith thou hast loved me may be in them, and I in them. And I'm going to repeat that. And I have declared unto them thy name, and will declare it, that the love wherewith thou hast loved me may be in them, and I in them. This is Jesus speaking to us. Jesus came to tell us about God, the Father, and who He really is. There was a lot of misconceptions when it came to about God before Jesus came. And even while we still walked the earth, many now saw God as an angry God, a God who is set on punishing His people. But Jesus came to show us who God really is, a loving Father who is set on saving His children from their sinful ways and setting them free from the enemy's oppression. Just like I had said earlier in the last video I just did, that when it comes to God, when it comes to religions and to these churches, that they have been so set on preaching this Jesus hippie loving God that they have portrayed Him as just that, and He is nothing else, that we forget the other side. There's many people that only believe in the New Testament, not the Old Testament. And just because we are in the New Covenant, under Jesus Christ, that we don't have to pay the Old Testament any attention. That is wrong. They even say that we don't have to pay the laws in the New Testament anything to do that. We just have to pay attention to Jesus. Well, they're wrong there too. Jesus is the law of Moses. The 10 Commandments still hold true to this day. God wrote them in stone with His finger and was placed in the Ark of the Covenant for eternity. Well, you know. We have to obey the law of Moses, for the law still stands. In fact, when Jesus speaks His law, every bit of thing that comes out of His mouth is the 10 Commandments. What is the first will of the 10 Commandments? To place no one above God. What does He say? To love God with all your mind, heart, and soul. 2, to love your neighbor as you love yourself. That is all 10 Commandments wrapped up in a nutshell. To obey those 2 commandments is to obey all 10 commandments. So when Jesus kept explaining to the Pharisees while they was preaching the law, pointing their fingers, being Christian Nazis, saying this is the law and you have to obey this law, and I enforce the law and I'm above the law because I know the law. Jesus was saying, good one, gotcha, I am the law. And that is what many's been debating on these medias and in the platforms all over the world and in many different churches when it comes to the preachers and teaching. And when they meet up, is the very same thing. Right now, there's people doing it. When we read about the Pharisees, we can somewhat laugh and say, man, how dumb were they? Just like when we laugh about the Israelites, when we read and say how stupid was the Israelites to constantly be complaining about when God kept providing for them, and how silly they must feel that God was constantly doing these things and they could not be thankful or grateful. But yet we act the same way, because even though He's taking care of us, we still complain about our lives and want to make something better. We can't be appreciative of the things that we already have and exist, that we want bigger and better things, that we are no different than the Israelites being lost in the wilderness with constant complaining and non-gratefulness and non-thankfulness. God didn't get rid of that whole generation and didn't allow them to cross into the promised land because they was worshiping other idols. It's because they wasn't being grateful. They wasn't thankful. Even though they saw signs and wonders and miracles, they was not thankful or grateful. Yet just generation still sees signs and wonders throughout the whole generations. God is slowly and kept on telling people and proving who he was, and we choose to ignore it. We choose to make excuses of it and say it's all because of this or that. We try to use science to explain it away. I don't know why we're using science to explain it away when science hasn't even begun to catch up with the existence of God. That all science is doing is trying to prove the things that God already proved. He's already created that, and they're trying to figure out why that exists. Because God created it, that's why it exists. Why does it function the way that it does? Because God made it that way. But they want to use the science to disprove God. God is science. God is math. There's a lot of people that try to say that, that they're on God's team and that they can't stand science because of what they're doing to God, but they forget that God is science. God is math. Who do you think invented everything? Who do you think's mathematical patterns and numbers all come together to form all that is? Science is a religion. Did you know that? And I'm not just speaking about Scientology. Science is a religion. Using things, just like the Pharisee used the law, they're using science to discredit God and what he is actually saying, what he's been saying this whole time, and what is right in front of everybody's faces. We have people online right now telling people that you need to have your head covered, you need to eat this and this such food, and that the Bible says that if you wear pants, that it is a sin. And let me explain to you, nowhere at all in the Bible does it mention the word pants. What it's referring to is men dressing up like women and women dressing up as men. That is called drag queens, my friend. That is called being transgender, where you are trying to be the opposite sex. And even though God knows the beginning, the end, and the future, it never once mentions the word pants in there. Why? Because that's not what he's talking to. That's not what he's talking about. Saying that women cannot wear pants. That's not at all what it's referring to. If that was the case, then why was men and women both wearing robes? You could call them dresses, you could call them robes. Because it's not referring to that. It's meaning when it says do not dress how the opposite sex dresses, is meaning dressing in drag queen, referring to the I am a female, but I'm going to make my appearance and my dress as such so that people will think and believe and know that I am a he. That's exactly what those words are meaning. But you got these people who are out here being Pharisees, telling people, spitting law, speaking the law, informing the law, but not knowing the law, not understanding the law, and they don't know who the law is. But they sure are spitting it out. And that's all that the Pharisees was doing. They knew the law, they spoke the law, and they informed the law, and they thought they was above the law, but they didn't know the law, and they didn't understand the law, and they didn't know who was the law. See, if they had understood the law, then they would realize that what they was talking about wasn't what they was saying. And then they would realize that certain of those laws that they was telling people they have to obey now referred to under the old covenant. We're not under that covenant anymore. That God changes his covenant throughout this book. In fact, there's many times, at least 3 or 4 times in the Old Testament alone, that God gave a new covenant to the people. He was changing with the times. We got to tell both sides of the story. God wasn't just a loving, peaceful God. He was also the Old Testament God, just as much as he was the New Testament God. And if we're going to tell about God, we got to tell both sides